Our next speaker is Tessa Kriesel, who's the agency and community engineer at Pantheon. And she's going to speak with us about conquering continuous integration and deployment. So help me welcome Tessa.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. So we'll just kind of dig in. He already introduced me. I'm an agency and community engineer at Pantheon. What that means is I get to help agencies, but I also get to help the community. So I get to build like sessions like this. I get to build like example repositories we're going to talk about. I get to do a variety of different things. That's pretty awesome. I also teach a lot of Girl Develop It classes. I'm from Minneapolis, so I do a lot with our tech initiative in general in Minneapolis. Founded a nonprofit organization that teaches kids to code, as well as Outspoken Women, which you all should check out if you are a woman that speaks at any conferences. Feel free to join. Lots about me. You can reach out if you want to get my slides. They should be posted on Twitter. That's my username, email, website, anything else you need about me. So just a raise of hands, how many of you are developers? So there's more developers than less. So I was building this session out, and I'm actually giving this at WordCamp Baltimore also, but it originally was very technical. And I kind of looked back and I'm like, what if my audience is not technical? What if WordCamp for publishers means that it's publishers, it's project managers, it's content writers? So I apologize for you developers, like the end half will be technical, but the beginning is going to be more business. But I think that'll suit well with our audience. So I have worked in a variety of different environments. I've worked at agencies. I've worked at super small agencies. I've worked at bigger agencies. I've worked at like Fortune 100 companies building WordPress. I've also, worked at like Pantheon, doing kind of middle of the road, kind of company relationships. So I have learned a lot of things in my day. And in this presentation, I've decided to put together this like agency or development team that we can relate to as we're talking about things. So we're going to talk about like the natural growth of an actual development team. So we start with one developer, and they use FTP because they don't know any better. Like, it makes me cringe just saying that. But this is how they start. So they're on FTP. They add another developer, and they figure out that like version control is a necessary thing that they need when they accidentally FTP over someone else's code because there's no indication of the fact that you did that. So we kind of get to the point where they add a third developer, projects are coming in, they're busier, they need more staffing. So at that point, they decide this third developer that comes in is really proficient in front-end development, super passionate about all the latest technologies. They suggest, let's use Sass, let's like do some JavaScript stuff, and let's use like Gulp for our task runner. And at that point, they also realize, okay, we're doing more work. Maybe we should actually dedicate someone to handling all of our DevOps. DevOps is like a big task, and if you don't know what's going on, especially if you don't know the status of like one environment to another, so having like one person do the DevOps seemed like a natural choice for them. So then we designated developer 2 as being our DevOps person. So we add a fourth developer, and if you can notice here, my team is like very gender neutral. This has never ever happened in my entire life, but in my fake agency, we're gender neutral. So fourth developer we bring in. Once the fourth developer comes in, they decide that like, cool, we can actually do 2 to 3 projects at one time. We can go into two-person teams and be able to kind of designate and delegate work out. So with that came an internet like wiki. So that wiki was going to record processes, documentation, how a new person might start, like things they need to get added to. Maybe it's GitHub and whatever else that they're using. But it's an internal wiki that can be used for processes. They bring in another developer. This new developer number 5, is remote. And they have never had to deal with a remote team member. So at that point, they decide, okay, we need Slack. We need some way to actually have communication with our entire team. They were, previous to developer 5, we're doing like morning stand-ups. Everyone was together, they were in the office, we'd get together, have a conversation, and be able to talk about things that were happening. With this fifth developer being remote, they couldn't do that anymore. And with their their segregated teams, it was even more so of a communication void. So, brought in Slack. After that, they ended up getting this like super awesome, like 1 year long project. And in this project, it was very detailed. They needed a lot of resources for it, but they weren't sure if this was something that was going to require another full-time person. We're doing this great project. Maybe we'll get another big one. Maybe we won't. Let's bring on some contractors. And so they brought in 2 dev contractors down at the bottom. And when they brought in new dev contractors, they had this realization that when you bring in people that you haven't used before, that you're not comfortable with, that you're not seeing every day, that there can kind of be like a void of trust with new developers. You don't know what they code like. You don't know like how anything that they're doing works. And so they brought in the process of doing code reviews. It was something that internally they really needed. It was also something that made them feel more secure about the contractor's work that was coming in. And they did that via GitHub pull requests. They had a lead project manager be the only one that could actually merge those pull requests into master. And then contractors and other developers would just submit through a branch, turn it into a pull request, and that's how their code review process took place. They ended up bringing a 6th person onto their team, so now they could do 3 projects hypothetically at the same time, likely more, in their 2-person team dynamic. So when they did that, up until this time, like this agency has been growing super fast, and they haven't really been paying attention to QA. They brought in obviously lots of new developers, and the developers are doing like their version of QA, but if you're a developer, you know that's not a sufficient amount of QA. So they actually hired an external team. They didn't bring anyone internal in. They hired an external team to be able to send their QA requests to. So that meant that the DevOps person was even more busier because they had to release to dev. They had to release to a QA. They had to release to production, wherever it was that they needed to be. Their job was increasing. And like developer 2 is a developer. He's not a DevOps person. He knows it and he enjoys it, but he'd rather write code. So now they're kind of getting to this point of like, we have all these technologies, we're making all of these milestones. Like, what do we do now so that developer 2 doesn't have to do DevOps, but yet we don't have the bandwidth of like 100% DevOps need. So if we kind of like go over what we just talked about, the milestones was like version control, bringing in latest technologies, designating a DevOps lead, writing internal like processes in a wiki, creating a Slack team, code reviews, and a QA team. All these awesome things that this agency has done. All of these things take time. You have to actually go into each task and do the thing that you need to do. So this is where I want to like introduce all of the terms and the things that I'm going to talk about, because in thinking about this awesome agency that we just talked about, we can correlate some of the things that continuous integration can do into their agency to like save them time. So continuous integration is really like the continuous testing of all of your code. I actually have like, I don't like to read from my notes, but this is a super great description, so I'm going to read exactly from my notes here. Continuous integration is a development practice that requires developers to integrate code into a shared repository several times a day. Each check-in is then verified by an automated build, allowing teams to detect problems early. By integrating regularly, you can detect errors quickly and locate them easily. So that's a lot of information, but that's really what it can do. It can go through the process of all the things that we talked about with the agency, compiling their SAS, sending a notification to QA, running a lot of tests that they're having QA do currently, like inside of the build process so that you don't have to spend that much money on QA. So continuous delivery is basically the act of continued delivery of code to an environment. It's not production, but it's to a different environment. So maybe this is when we're sending it to an environment just for QA. So QA needs to have their own site. They can go there, look at things. You'll send the updates there. Or maybe it's just any other environment that you need. Continuous deployment is the act of deploying to production. So inside of your build, you've gotten past QA, you've gotten past code reviews, all the things that you have to work through. And this is the act of like, okay, everything passed, this is done, just deploy it for me. And nobody has to sit there and like, oh, we need to migrate the database over, we need to do all of this stuff. It's already all set up in your continuous integration build. So we're going to look at an example build. So I just added this. There's nothing more exciting than finally fixing your build. This was me yesterday, like failure, 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 like all morning long until I got my like success. And I was like, yes, this is happening. And this is something you should prepare for. And it is hard. It's not easy to figure out if you're like not good at bash scripting also, which I myself was not. That makes it even scarier. So I also want to like let you know that I was completely like deathly afraid of continuous integration as of like 3 months ago. So I am a real case study that you can figure it out and it is possible. So I do have an example repository. So my slides are already on Twitter. So if you want to get the slides and all the content, they're already out there. But it's github.com/tessk22 and then conquering-CI. Feel free to fork that, copy it, whatever. That's out there for you. I'm going to kind of dig into what I did. So I'm not going to follow all of these steps because like when you need code to work, it doesn't. But I set it up yesterday and knows that it's working. So we'll go through some of them. So the act of setting up this example repository that I just shared is forking or downloading that repository. However you want to do it, get it in GitHub. And then you don't have to create a Pantheon site, but I like work at Pantheon, and so my spare time and the contributing I get to do is usually related around Pantheon. So this does have like deployment scripts to Pantheon, but you can definitely like edit those deployment scripts to your own server as well. Create new project in Circle CI, pretty easy. Add your SSH key to Circle CI, add your environment variables. You have to rebuild because at step like 3, when you create the project, Circle CI will be like, okay, let's build it. And none of your stuff is in there, so it's going to fail. And then start to write new code. So I'm actually going to pop over. We'll see what my browser looks like in here. I like just recently switched to an iPad Pro for like development and everything, and it's been pretty awesome. So that's a side note. So this is the repository that I just shared with you. It's probably a little bit hard to see in the back. And it has a lot of stuff in it, and we're going to kind of watch the build go through as we do it. But really the concept here is like a nested doc root for your WordPress installation. Has anyone heard of Bedrock? 1 person, 2 people? Okay. Kind of the same concepts as Bedrock. We have a nested doc root, and in your directory you actually have all the dependency management and all the things. And then inside of the web folder is actually WordPress. So this would be the start. We're going to clone this, fork it, whatever it is that, I guess not really clone, but copy it over to your own environment. And then when you pop over to Circle CI, you can actually go to projects in Circle CI. And it will recognize, because what you do is like to create a Circle CI account is free, first off. And secondly, you like log in with GitHub. So it will already have all of your projects ready to go. So you can go to project, you can click add project. I'll just show you. When you add a project, it'll show you everything that you have in GitHub. It'll say which one you want to do. You can do setup project, and then when you do that, it asks you like 1 or 2 questions, and you're good to go. At those 1 or 2 questions, you just want to choose like PHP, and then hit start building. I already have this all set up, because like I said, if you want to write code on the fly in front of people, it doesn't work, and it needs to work. But this is the like previous builds that I had that all failed, and then I had some successes, which are always a good win. If you were out by the booth, I was sitting at the Pantheon booth, and I was like, yes! Super loud, and I'm sure everybody heard me, but I don't care. It was exciting. So this is kind of like what Circle CI looks like. So in that process, you'd come here. You have to ignore all my notifications that are going to pop up. You would come here and go into your project, and inside of this little gear, so it's like far right corner underneath my little like image, is a gear there, and you can actually like go in and set up your settings. So this exact example has a bunch of variables that you can add. So if we go over to build settings and then we go to environment variables on the left-hand side, these are all the environment variables that I created. The nice things about these is that you can add these variables inside of your build. So if you're like, oh, I really want to know, maybe I'm going to do like 5 Slack notifications. I just want the Slack channel to be like always just put into the code. Then you create your environment variable, and then you put your variable inside of your code, and then it will always grab whatever you added to Circle. You also want to add an SSH key, which you do down under like permissions, and then it says SSH permissions. You always want to add one of those. They need a private SSH key. If you don't do that, you're going to get like the password prompt, and you can't actually type into Circle. It's all automated. So that's environment variables. Let's pop over to, that's my Pantheon site. We don't need to do that. Let's actually edit some code at this point. All right. So this is working copy. It's a really great like Git iOS program. I just wanted to check to see what branch I'm on. So I'm on a new branch called Publishers. I'm going to go edit some code. Right now I'm in the SAS file. So we have 2017. There's like a child theme of it set up, and it's using gulp to like run through and compile SAS. So I'm just going to do a little bit of editing here. Anyone have a favorite color? I want to blur it out. Green is good. Oh, said green first. I know. I am like obsessed with purple, so I'm all about any shade of purple. All right, cool. So I changed my code. Going back over to working copy, I'm going to commit it into my new branch. Let's go with green. All right, I'm committing it. This might take, oh, it was quicker than I thought. Right when I was going to say this might take a while, then it doesn't. All right, cool. So I'm going to go back over to Circle CI and go to my build. The nice thing with GitHub and the Circle CI integration is that it recognizes any time that you submit code to GitHub, and then it will build upon receiving that code. So you can see here, it's already building. We can click into it, and like this was what was incredibly scary to me. You're like, oh, it's cool. It's all in Circle CI. It'll just like build it out for you, and it's all good. And I like was sitting here watching this, and I'm like, this is not good. Like, what does this mean? And so as we're actually going to like watch it, and you can have the same scary feelings I had. But as you set up your build, there is a really important file called the circle.yaml file. And actually, like, at this very moment, Circle is coming out with their new version of 2.0. And so they've slightly changed it. Unfortunately, after I master it, they go and change things. But you can kind of set that up in your initial project. So if we kind of look at this build now, we've got some things that have been happening. Up here is all configuration. So you set all of like the machine configuration in your circle.yaml file. You tell it like, I want Node, I want the latest version of PHP, I want it to be in this time zone, I want all the other things that you want in there. And then it like kind of sets all that up. That's kind of what all that beginning stuff was. It's setting my time zone. I've got some environment variables. So these are the environment variables we added. So it's bringing those in. It's set my Node version, my PHP version, any like caching things. We can go down here. These ones are less obvious to figure out. So we have BHAT testing going on this. Has anyone heard of BHAT testing? Couple? All right, so BHAT testing is like behavior-driven development testing, basically. And what it means is that you can set up a BHAT test that says, hey, if I go to this page, I should expect to see site title inside of an H1. Or if I go to this page, I should expect to see a form that if I click into, like, allows me to type. Or receives this error, or whatever. It's actually like human readable testing. So we'll look at the code. But we have BHAT testing running in here. So BHAT is like setting up its processes. Right here we installed Terminus, which is a command line tool for Pantheon. We authenticated Terminus. We are using Composer. So we brought in, does anyone use Composer? Okay, more people use Composer, cool. So it's really easy to use Composer with this process because you say, hey, Composer, this is all the stuff I want. Just give me all the stuff I want in my build, and it will bring all of those assets in there for you. And then right down here, as you can like sort of maybe see, it says build gulp assets. So it's running the bash script for building the gulp assets. Scroll down. Let's see what else we got. So we have some more BHAT testing stuff. We have coding standards. So we have like code sniffing in there as well. That's like looking for PHP, like WordPress best practice coding standards. Yesterday, that was one of my failures because I had like an extra space at the end of something. So that was cool. So I had to get through that. Then we also have PHP unit testing that's totally configurable to whatever you want it to be doing. And then down here, we finally have all of these tests. We compiled our SAS. We did all the things that we wanted it to do. And it gets down to a like deployment to Pantheon process. And so that deployment can be set up to deploy anywhere. But in this case, it's going over to Pantheon. So we had a successful build, which is awesome. Let's go back to, this is like super hard to see. I was hoping you guys would be able to see this. So this is my repository for my site and for like my build process. So I have this circle.yaml file here. That is the file that is basically saying, do this, then do that, then do this. If all of that passes, then do this, and it's a deployment script. I have composer.json and my composer lock file. Very common if you're using Composer. I have a bhat YAML file, and actually I will probably show you. Let's go look at a bhat test. If I can give you like any advice, which multiple advice obviously, but would be to like implement bhat testing. It's so easy, and it can alleviate a lot of like QA time suck. This is literally as easy as it is. Homepage, title, like when I go to the homepage, I should see Pantheon WP best practices in an H1. If I go to, again, homepage, I should see GitHub Composer Circle CI Pantheon equals win as a site description. So these are things that you can set up to basically avoid a super long QA process, because if things are functioning and you have a bhat test written to ensure everything is functioning, then you don't have to manually test it. Circle's doing that for you. Okay, let's pop back over. How much time do I have? I have plenty of time. Okay, I'm talking super fast. So let's dig back into some more files. So I have this pull request here because that's how I created this repository. So like we talked about with our awesome agency, turning things into pull requests, having code reviews. So my deployment script is set up to only deploy if it's in a pull request, or to deploy if it's on the master branch. If it's on the master branch, then it will deploy to what is technically like Pantheon's dev environment, but could be your live environment. And then also over to like a feature branch. So let's look at this other file. Can anyone see this like at all? Is it pretty bad? Okay. Yeah, I kind of figured that. So if we kind of run through this, like if you guys pop over to like GitHub eventually and start digging through it, like you'll actually see that it's really not all that complicated. But it has like the machine setup. It has all of my environment variables. It has like the cache directories I might need. We're installing Yarn, so it has like the Yarn installation way at the top. Then we're installing like Terminus. We're doing our gulp. We're authenticating. It's just like a lot of steps to basically get through this process. I'm going to pop back over to my slides, and it's probably okay that we have a lot more time for. 1 second. I lost my navigation. Cool. So we edited some code. We put it over to GitHub. Let's actually turn it into a pull request, and then we can see the deployment piece of it. GitHub. All right, cool. So I just turned it into a pull request. And I think this should build again. Sometimes it takes time. We'll rebuild this one so it does our deploy. So we edited some code, pushed it to GitHub. It's going to rebuild. And in this build, like I'll come back to this, but I want to show you like the deployment script of like what it's going through to actually like make it happen in a different environment. So Keynote. All right, so the big thing of like coming back to this is I wanted to be able to relate some of the milestones that the agency went through and how they can convert that to like a continuous integration thing. So they started using GitHub, obviously for version control. That's fine, that's great. Like use GitHub as your main resource, Bitbucket, GitLab, like whatever it is that you're using. The whole point of continuous integration is so that your entire team is like submitting code to one central place. So even if you're working on a Drupal project, or maybe you're working on like some other project, GitHub or some other like Git repository place can help you do all of those things in one location. So Sass and Gulp, they brought in Sass, they were doing some other stuff with JavaScript, they were using Gulp for task runners. We've automated that in our Circle CI build. We've gone through and the Gulp file that is actually processing like compiling Sass and things like that is all in our repository. And so that's all automated. So you don't have to compile Sass on your own. and worry about like SaaS version issues and any other like issues or merge conflicts that you might have like with using SaaS. So DevOps lead, we talked about developer 2 being our DevOps lead person. By the time that we got to a team of 6+, they were spending a lot of time doing DevOps, and they didn't want to be spending a lot of time doing DevOps. And so with continuous integration and continuous delivery, a lot of those things were automated. We set up all of our tests. We said we had our BHAT tests, so we're testing functionality. We had our scripts, so we're compiling SaaS. We had our unit testing. We had our code sniffing. All of the things that we can ensure that our sites are successful, we can have robots do for us. So this would lead the DevOps person to only have to like troubleshoot failure builds, which is still a monster in itself, but still, hopefully, you have successful builds. Internal wiki. The nice thing about continuous integration is that the processes that your team is doing in your build are really like your internal development processes, right? Like doing SaaS, doing these tests, doing these different things. It's actually like a documented way to tell you like what your dev processes are and should be. Slack notifications for your builds. Any like build that you set up, any kind of deployment, you can integrate a Slack notification or any other kind of notification for that matter. And actually be able to do that at certain points so that people on your team might know that, oh cool, this site is being deployed, or it's being sent to QA because it got put up on a QA staging environment or whatever. And so then that helps your team be informed about things that are like happening without you actually having to manually create that message. And then code reviews. We implemented code reviews with pull requests. My example is built on the assumption that if code is submitted, we don't build or we don't deploy it anyways. It'll go through the build process, but it won't deploy unless it's a pull request or unless it's coming from the master branch. And so that means that it's already been code reviewed. We don't have to worry about code being submitted and pushed up to an environment without code reviews getting done first. And then QA team. Between BHAT testing and all the other testing we have in here, the only QA that's really left is like actual design QA to make sure that the site like appears as the way that it should in all of the browsers. The functionality is done by BHAT. All right, so I must have talked really fast. Maybe I forgot some stuff, which is pretty normal of me. But I think that this is probably like a good time to like answer questions. So hopefully you all have some awesome questions so I can dig in deeper. Yeah. Yes, there's a mic.
Not super related to your talk topic. What iPad apps were you using?
Awesome. So he asked what iPad apps I was using. I actually have an entire talk that I'm giving at DrupalCon Vienna that talks about web development on an iPad. I'm using Textastic, which you can see here, and then Working Copy. Working Copy lets you like clone in like Git repositories basically from anywhere, but it also lets you bring in Git repositories from GitHub and like whatever else. And then Textastic like syncs with Working Copy. So when you like clone a repository on Working Copy, you can actually bring it into like Textastic. So if I go back here, I can say open, and then I can actually open from Working Copy, and then it'll give me the repositories that I have like inside of Working Copy. But anyways, I don't know what I just did. There we go. So you can like bring in like those directories that are showing up there. Outside of that, like I have prompt and transmit. So prompt is for like command line. The only issue I've had with like command line on an iPad is like being able to run like curl commands and things that like require installation. But I set up a Cloud9 environment, and so Cloud9 has like Terminus and like some of the other stuff that I need. And then my Cloud9 environment, I just run commands through. So, and then like, I don't do it a lot, but transmit is obviously FTP, so if there's any reason I have to FTP, I could do it. Good question. Yeah. You guys, we have like 15 more minutes. You have to ask me more questions. Or you could just go eat lunch early. I mean, that's a thing too.
So I have a question about like the team makeup. You mentioned that you at one point had a developer kind of doing some DevOps work, and then I guess once the infrastructure was put into place, then they could focus on dev. Have you seen, have you been in a situation where you've had to have like say a DevOps person, or did you have teams like share the duties of setting up the scripts and all that?
Yeah, I have been in probably like a variety of different environments when it came to that. Like previous to Pantheon, I was at General Mills. I got sucked into some Sitecore and .NET work and made my heart really sad. But they also had a lot of WordPress projects that I was promised to work on, but rarely happened. But their build process was crazy. Like they had like Jenkins builds and like all these random things going that were like a lot more complicated. And so I've definitely seen like dedicated DevOps people. They weren't necessarily using like Circle, but they were using Jenkins, which is also another provider. So Circle CI, like I probably didn't really explain this well. It's just like it's a tool that goes through the actual continuous integration and build process. And like Jenkins is an alternative, but it's like much more complicated to set up. Like Travis is another one. There's like DeployBot and like CodeShip and tons more. But I've like seen a variety of that scenario. And I think that like it helps. Everyone should still know DevOps. Like in that team, I was actually the DevOps person that was like, oh, I'll figure it out. Like it's fine, I'll do it. Mainly because I can never say no. But like there are teams that like you don't need that. Like especially with the different tools and whatever else. So
it depends on the team.
Yeah, I think it depends on the team. Like if there's like a huge makeup. I mean, if you have like a team that you're like curious if it would be beneficial. Like I think in general, like if you have someone that's willing to take the time and like learn continuous integration and learn how to put it together, like once they put it together, then I feel like other developers will be like, oh cool, I actually see what it's doing now. I can tweak it for what I want to do. Because that's like how I learned. Because when I looked at the Circle build, I was like, nope, this is not happening. And then I looked at the actual repository behind it and I'm like, okay, circle.yaml file, this controls it. I'm looking through, I'm like walking through the steps. Okay, now it's going to like this bash script. Okay, what is this bash script doing? So like, yeah, there's probably one person that really needs to be like the owner or initiator, but I think that getting everyone involved will make life a lot easier. Yeah.
Hi, two questions. First, how did you land on Circle as your tool of choice?
Yeah.
And secondly, have you explored using automation engines like Ansible instead of a library of shell scripts for deployment?
I have not. So I would definitely be intrigued to like hear if somebody has been. But I landed on Circle because, so Travis is another option. There's lots of other ones. I landed on Circle mainly because like that's what someone else was already using. But it also is the only one that is free for like one build at a time. I shouldn't say only. I'm not sure if the others are. Travis is not as like giving when it comes to like being able to have free builds. But so that's really like, I could have one free build and like it was already an example that I stuck with. So yeah. I was gonna say like too, so before this talk I was trying to build like a really great repository someone could start with like outside of Pantheon. And like nobody is doing this, so other people should do this so we can start comparing ideas.
So when you're introducing continuous integration, especially test coverage to a team that already has existing projects, how did you approach training the developers to build tests that maybe didn't want to learn all the setup of the continuous integration, but there was a lot of code to cover that could utilize those tests for more dependable deployments?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually get to do that all the time because that's my job at Pantheon is that when developers or agencies want to get started with Pantheon and they decide like that's their processes, I actually can do trainings, like 2-day, like 4-hour each day dedicated trainings. And we either talk about Pantheon stuff if you're totally new and that's what you want to learn, or we talk about like setting up advanced workflows. And so this is where like this original repository kind of stemmed from, is like us having conversations with agencies and like they're all like, oh, we really want to do automated tests, but we're not doing it and no one has the time to do it. And so that example repository I feel like is a really good way for people to get started. Like especially if you don't know Behat and you don't know code sniffing or you don't like know how to set up unit tests, it can be scary and like no one has that extra time. So I think that it's important for someone to say like, okay, if this is something we want to do, like this is one person that's going to spend this time and resources to be able to like figure this out. Otherwise, like it just depends on like what avenue they're kind of digging into. I think that it's hard to spend time on something that's going to save you time if you don't have the time. Does that make sense? Like at one of the agencies I worked at, like we had this theme that we always used for everything. It started with like underscore, super bare bones. We like added bootstrap, added like some custom post types. We were always doing like, all the like normal things. And like we had a really hard time like maintaining it, but yet at the same time we used it constantly, multiple times a week. So it's like everyone needs to like slow down a little bit and realize that maybe it's going to take you time to do it, but it's going to be more efficient in the long run if you do it now and do it right, and then have it ready for duplicating in projects. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I do want to note that if you actually are like, okay, I want to figure out how this works, you could totally just take my repository, run with it, set up those variables, and it's free to set up a Pantheon site. So even if you want to like, don't use Pantheon, but you want to set it up and see how it's working, like feel free to create an account, totally free, but you also need an agency account, which is also free. So yeah, set it up, see what you think. I will be around the rest of the day. I also will be at the after party, so if you want to talk CI or anything else, I'm here. I would love your feedback. This is a form that's on my website. None of the fields are required, so it can be totally anonymous. I would love to hear what you think, like if there's anything I can talk about more or less or whatever that would help you consume information better.
Thank you.
Thank you.